The marble floor of Liberty Trust Bank gleamed under the afternoon sun as Grace Walker stepped through the revolving doors. Her movements were measured, deliberate, like someone who'd carried dignity through too many storms to let a new one shake her. At 62, she wore age-like armor, silver hair, cropped close, a charcoal suit tailored with quiet precision, and eyes that saw more than she ever said. The lobby hummed with the sterile rhythm of money-clicking heels, distant printers, the faint buzz of polite conversation. At the far end, a young teller glanced up, his expression shifting the moment he saw her. Jason's smile was tight, practiced, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, voice flat as he leaned over the counter. "The Welfare Services office is down the street. This is a private bank." A ripple moved through the room. Heads turned. Grace stopped just short of the counter. For a long second, she said nothing, letting the silence spread. Then she reached into her leather purse and placed a neatly folded withdrawal slip in front of him. "I'd like to withdraw $40,000, she said softly. Her tone was calm, almost polite, but something in her eyes made Jason flinch. He looked at the slip and laughed, a short, sharp sound meant to humiliate. 40,000, he repeated. "That's cute. You people always have a story." His voice rose just enough for nearby customers to hear. A man in a business suit smirked. A young woman near the line frowned but said nothing. The air felt suddenly heavier. Grace didn't move. She didn't argue. She simply adjusted the pearl brooch on her lapel and waited. Behind her, an older woman in a janitor's uniform, Elena, a retired security guard who sometimes helped around the branch, froze mid-step, her mop dripping onto the floor. She recognized that look, that subtle tilt of the chin. It was the same one her mother had worn the day a landlord refused to rent to them in '72. Jason tapped the counter impatiently. "Ma'am, I'm going to need identification, assuming you have an account here." The sarcasm dripped like acid. Grace opened her wallet and slid over her ID and a platinum debit card. The card caught the light engraved with the Liberty Trust emblem. Jason picked it up, studied it for half a second, and smirked. Fake ones are getting better every year. A murmur spread. A man in line muttered something about scammers. The security guard near the door shifted his weight but didn't step in. No one did. Grace's heartbeat was steady. She'd faced rooms colder than this, one, boardrooms full of men who underestimated her clients, who thought kindness meant weakness. But this moment was different. This wasn't business. It was personal. The sting wasn't just in the insult, but in the ease of it, the casual certainty that she didn't belong. She drew a slow breath. "You might want to remember my name," she said quietly. Jason scoffed. "Oh, I'm sure I will." The tension stretched until it felt like the whole building was holding its breath. The clock above the counter clicked from 12:14 to 12:15. Somewhere in the distance, a printer beeped. The branch manager, Linda Prescott, stepped out of her glass office, her heels clicking against the marble. She surveyed the scene with mild irritation. "Jason, what's the issue?" "This lady's trying to make a large withdrawal," he said, emphasizing the word lady. 40,000 claims she has a platinum account. Doesn't look right to me. Linda's eyes slid over Grace like she was appraising a piece of worn furniture. "Ma'am, we have procedures for high-value transactions," she said smoothly. "Do you have proof of employment Source of funds documentation? Grace met her gaze unflinching. I have everything you need, she replied. Of course, Linda said, her smile brittle. Please understand, we just have to be careful these days. So many scams going around. Elena took a step forward, mop in hand, wanting to speak, but knowing the rules. She'd seen this movie too many times. The difference was, this woman wasn't shrinking. She wasn't apologizing for existing. Grace leaned slightly on the counter, her voice soft but sharp enough to cut through the room. You think you're protecting something, she said, but what you're protecting isn't the bank. It's your prejudice. Jason blinked, caught off guard. Excuse me? You heard me. Her tone never rose. You don't see customers. You see categories. A young woman in line took out her phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. Others followed. The faint sound of a notification pinged through the air, one then another. People were filming now. Jason straightened, trying to regain control. Ma'am, if you don't calm down, I'll have to ask security to escort you out. Grace gave a small, weary smile. Calm is all I've been for 62 years. For a moment, their eyes locked, the arrogance of youth meeting the steel of experience. Grace's expression didn't waver. It was the look of someone who'd been dismissed too many times to flinch anymore. Linda cleared her throat. Jason, please process the verification request. Jason hesitated, then pretended to type on his screen. He said. After a pause, this account shows some irregularities. A lie smooth and easy. He said it the way people like him always did, counting on everyone else to believe him. Grace's hands stayed folded on the counter. Her voice dropped to a whisper that carried farther than any shout. Do what you need to do. I'm not leaving. Outside, the tall glass windows. Traffic rolled past, oblivious. Inside, time slowed. The lobby, the employees, the customers, everyone felt the shift, though no one could name it. Something was happening beneath the surface, quiet but unstoppable. Elena met Grace's eyes across the lobby. There was a spark there, recognition, the shared fatigue of women who had spent lifetimes holding their ground in rooms that didn't want them. Grace gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that said, not today, not again. The clock ticked to 12:20. Jason sighed dramatically. You're wasting everyone's time. Grace looked around at the faces staring, recording, judging. She felt the weight of generations pressing behind her, the women who'd been told to sit down, the men who'd been told to wait, the lives delayed by someone else's arrogance. She straightened her posture, smoothed the crease in her jacket, and looked Jason dead in the eye. No, she said. I'm teaching it a lesson. No one spoke. The sound of the ticking clock filled the silence like a heartbeat. Outside, a storm was gathering over Chicago. Inside Liberty Trust Bank, the air felt thick with history, about to repeat or finally break. Grace didn't move. Her stillness was power. Her patience, defiance. When the next announcement echoed through the speakers, executive meeting. At 1 o'clock, Jason rolled his eyes and muttered, Yeah, right. Grace smiled faintly, the kind of smile that knew something he didn't. She gathered her ID and card, placed them neatly back on the counter, and whispered almost to herself, Let's see if your meeting starts on time. The light above flickered once. The phones kept recording. And Grace Walker, quiet, steady, unbroken, stood her ground as the city moved on outside, unaware that history had just walked into a bank and refused to be ignored. The phones came out one by one like fireflies in a dark field. The first was lifted by a young journalist, Maya Flores, who'd stopped by Liberty Trust Bank on her lunch break to deposit a freelance check. She was the kind of person who saw patterns in silence, who noticed injustice long before others dared to name it. When she saw Grace Walker standing there, calm, immovable, surrounded by suspicion, something in her chest clenched. Without thinking, she opened her camera and went live. "Banking discrimination, happening right now in downtown Chicago," she said softly, her voice trembling with anger. The image focused on Grace's hands, steady, elegant, resting on the marble counter, as the teller Jason leaned back in his chair, smirking. Within minutes, the live stream had 100 viewers. Then 200. By the time Jason said, "Ma'am, we're going to need employment verification for a withdrawal that size," it had passed 2,000. Comments flooded in, scrolling faster than Maya could read. "This is disgusting. She's so calm. Look at his face. Someone call the news." Grace didn't seem to notice the camera. Her attention stayed fixed on the two employees in front of her, Jason and his manager, Linda Prescott. Linda's tone was smooth as glass, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. "We have strict procedures for large cash transactions," she said, as if explaining a simple fact to a child. "You'll need to provide proof of employment and income source before we proceed." "I've provided all my documents," Grace replied. Her voice was low, composed. Linda smiled thinly. "We just want to make sure everything checks out. You understand?" Grace didn't answer. Silence became her protest, and it filled the room louder than any argument. James, the security guard by the door, shifted uneasily. He was new at this branch, but he knew who the real threat was, and it wasn't the woman standing at the counter. He caught Linda's eye, then looked away. The job didn't pay enough to challenge management. Maya's live stream continued to climb. $4,000 viewers. 6,500. The chat erupted with outrage and disbelief. "This is 2025. How is this still happening?" Jason straightened his tie, trying to project authority. "Ma'am, we'll need to contact your employer directly," he said. "What company do you work for?" Grace looked at him, calm as still water. "I work for myself." He chuckled. "Of course you do." There was a sound from the back, a sharp intake of breath. Elna, the older janitor, froze mid-sweep. She'd seen that look before, the look of someone being measured by the wrong scale. The tension thickened. A few customers began whispering. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded approvingly at Jason's vigilance. Linda crossed her arms. "We'll have to run this through our verification system," she announced. "It may take a while. Please step aside while we process." Grace didn't move. "I'll wait here." A murmur spread through the lobby. Maya's camera captured everything. The dismissive gestures, the mocking tone, the quiet cruelty of bureaucracy dressed up as protocol. Her viewer count surged again, $10,000, then $12,000. Screens across the city lit up as people tuned in during their lunch breaks. "This woman's being profiled at Liberty Trust," Maya narrated. "She's got ID, a platinum account card, and they still won't serve her." Jason leaned closer to Linda. "Should we call security?" Linda lowered her voice, but not enough. "Let's make her wait. She'll leave eventually." Grace heard every word. She didn't flinch. Her patience wasn't surrender, it was precision. A man in line stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said. "If she has the right documents, why can't you just process the transaction?" Linda turned to him with a tight smile. "Sir, this is a security matter. Please don't interfere." "That's not security," he muttered. "That's bias." The room shifted. People started taking sides. Some crossed their arms and stayed silent. Others pulled out their phones. Maya's live stream counter flashed $18,000. Then a moment of quiet. Grace looked down at her phone as it buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared: executive board meeting at 1:00 p.m. She turned the phone face down without a word. Linda tapped her watch impatiently. "Ma'am, I really need you to step aside." Grace's lips curved into a faint smile. "And I really need you to treat customers equally." Jason rolled his eyes. "We treat everyone equally, ma'am. That's the policy." Maya's camera panned slowly across the lobby, showing 2 white customers being served quickly at the next counter, while Grace stood waiting, unacknowledged. The contrast was unbearable. The live stream chat exploded. "This is proof. Look at that. Someone contact the NAACP." James, still by the door, exhaled quietly. His radio crackled. "Regional director's on his way," came a voice from the back office. The air changed. Grace turned her gaze toward the glass doors, as if she already knew who was coming. Maya followed her line of sight, still recording, still narrating quietly. "Something's happening," she whispered. She's not surprised. A few more customers drifted closer, drawn by the strange gravity of the scene. The marble lobby that had once felt sterile now pulsed with tension. The story was escaping its walls, digital, unstoppable, alive. Jason tried to reassert control, his voice louder now. "Look, lady, this isn't personal. We just can't hand out 40 grand to anyone who walks in off the street." Grace tilted her head. "Anyone?" she repeated softly. "Or someone like me?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The question hung there heavy and undeniable. Maya's phone buzzed again. Viewers, 23,400. National journalists were joining the stream, quoting it, tagging Liberty Trust Bank in outrage. Linda sighed. "Jason, just stall her until David gets here." Jason nodded, trying to look busy, as he typed random letters on his keyboard. "Sure thing, boss." Grace looked at the reflection of the overhead clock in the polished counter. 12:40. 20 minutes until 1. She smiled faintly, almost to herself, and straightened her jacket. From her phone, Maya's voice carried across the lobby. "If anyone knows the number for Liberty Trust Corporate, call them. The world's watching." The sound echoed. Grace met Maya's eyes for the first time, a brief exchange of gratitude and warning. "Keep filming." Outside traffic roared past as if nothing monumental was happening. But inside that building, something irreversible had already begun. The live stream rolled on, unfiltered, undeniable. The story of a woman, a system, and a silence breaking in real time. When the speaker above the counter crackled to life, "executive meeting in 30 minutes, Grace's smile widened ever so slightly. The timing was perfect. She didn't move. She didn't need to. History was already watching. The doors to Liberty Trust Bank swung open just as the clock struck 1. A man in a sharp navy suit strode across the marble floor, his expression tight, his pace brisk. David Lee, the regional director, was known for his calm efficiency, but today his jaw was set in irritation. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice slicing through the murmurs. "I was told there's a potential fraud case." Linda Prescott hurried to meet him, smoothing her blazer. "Yes, sir," she said quickly, eager to sound in control. This woman attempted to withdraw $40,000 in cash. No prior appointment, no verification of income. Jason noticed irregularities in her account. Jason nodded, his smirk gone, but his arrogance intact. Yeah, the system flagged it. Something didn't look right. David's gaze shifted to Grace Walker, still standing at the counter, perfectly still. She met his eyes without flinching. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his tone, but not his condescension. "If you cooperate, we can resolve this quickly. Our protocols exist to protect legitimate customers." A murmur ran through the crowd. Maya's live stream was still rolling, the viewer count climbing past 30,000. Every word, every gesture was being broadcast to a public hungry for justice or outrage. Grace didn't raise her voice. "I am a legitimate customer, Mr. Lee," she said evenly. "And more than that, I'm a stakeholder in this institution." David frowned. Stakeholder? Without another word, Grace opened her leather portfolio. Inside were neatly arranged folders, embossed envelopes, and a small silver business card case. She lifted one card and placed it on the counter. Grace Walker. It read in fine black print, founder and chairwoman Walker Financial Group. Jason scoffed. "You've got to be kidding. Anyone can print those." But David had gone still. His eyes scanned the card, then widened. Something about the name tugged at his memory. He reached out, hesitated, then picked it up. The texture, the raised lettering, it wasn't fake. His mind raced through recent board reports, quarterly earnings calls, investor briefings. Walker Financial Group. The name appeared again and again in acquisition files, shareholder, documents, capital injection records. Slowly, realization spread across his face like a dawning storm. Walker Financial owns 29% of Liberty Trust, he murmured. His voice was quiet, but the words rippled through the lobby. Linda froze. Jason's face drained of color. The security guard by the door looked at Grace with new recognition, as though seeing her for the first time. Grace's tone stayed soft, controlled. "I didn't come here today as a chairwoman," she said. "I came as a customer. I wanted to see how your people treat someone they don't recognize. Someone who doesn't fit their idea of belonging." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the air conditioner seemed to pause. Maya's camera zoomed in on Grace's face, serene, composed, almost sad. The live stream chat exploded. "She owns the bank. This is unreal. Justice in real time." David swallowed hard. "Ms. Walker, I had no idea. I know you didn't." Grace interrupted gently. "That's the point." She gestured toward Jason and Linda. They didn't know either. They assumed. An assumption is the oldest kind of prejudice there is. Jason tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. He looked around helplessly, as if the crowd might save him. Linda opened her mouth, but Grace raised a hand, silencing her without effort. "This isn't about me," Grace continued. "It's about every person who's been told their money wasn't real. Their voice didn't matter. Their place wasn't here." Her phone buzzed softly on the counter. She glanced at the screen, then turned it toward David. A notification glowed: Senate Financial Committee, monitoring, live feed. David's breath caught. "You're streaming this?" Grace shook her head. "Not me." "The truth is," she nodded toward Maya, whose live stream now exceeded 60,000 viewers. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone. Linda's eyes darted to the camera, then to David. "Sir, perhaps we should move this to a private office," she whispered. Grace looked at her. "Private," she said. "This stopped being private the moment you made a public spectacle out of my skin color." The audience gasped. The words were not shouted, but they hit harder than any scream could have. Outside, news vans were already pulling up to the curb. Inside, no one dared move. The room that had once reeked of quiet authority now trembled under the presence of a woman who had reclaimed it. David's phone buzzed next his assistant, texting updates from corporate headquarters. Executives were watching the live stream. Stockholders were calling. Reporters were circling. The incident had already become a crisis. Grace reached into her folder again and placed another card next to the first. It bore the Liberty Trust emblem engraved in silver. Below it, smaller text read, "Board of Directors, voting member." David's face paled. "You're on the board?" he said weakly. "I don't just sit on the board," Grace replied. "I helped build it." Gasps echoed across the room. Jason stumbled back a step. Linda looked like she might faint. The live stream comment feed turned into a waterfall of disbelief and applause. Maya caught every detail: the trembling hands, the darting eyes, the stillness of Grace Walker standing firm in the center of chaos. Grace's expression softened, though her eyes stayed sharp. "Mr. Lee," she said, "you have a decision to make. You can continue pretending this is just another misunderstanding, or you can recognize what it really is: proof that your system is broken from the inside out." David didn't answer. His phone buzzed again, another message corporate crisis team activated. Grace turned slightly toward Maya's camera. "I didn't plan this," she said quietly, "but I'm not surprised by it either, because I've been watching this pattern for years. And today, the world gets to see what it looks like up close." The clock above the counter ticked to 1:10. The announcement came over the loudspeaker again: "Executive meeting in 20 minutes." Grace smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and power. "Yes," she said, "let's hope they start on time." Maya's live stream hit 90,000 viewers. Outside, the sirens of news vans echoed in the distance. Inside Liberty Trust Bank, silence reigned as everyone realized what had just happened. A lifetime of quiet strength had turned humiliation into history. And no one in that room would ever forget the name Grace Walker again. The heavy glass doors burst open again, and this time the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the marble hall. Robert Mills, the president of Liberty Trust Bank, moved fast enough to betray panic. His face, usually composed for boardrooms and press conferences, looked pale under the fluorescent lights. He'd been briefed mid-ride in his black sedan, a viral live stream, an alleged discrimination incident, and the woman at the center of it, Grace Walker. When he saw her standing there, calm and upright at the teller counter, surrounded by his staff, his steps faltered. "Grace," he said quietly, as if her name alone might steady the chaos. "I didn't expect." Grace turned slowly, the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "You didn't expect I'd come as a customer, Robert. Isn't that what we built this place for?" Maya's camera panned to catch every second. Her live stream had passed 100,000 viewers. The feed mirrored on news outlets across the country. Every word mattered now. Robert approached cautiously, lowering his voice. We're deeply sorry for this misunderstanding. Grace's eyes softened, but her tone was firm. It's not a misunderstanding when it follows a pattern. You know that. David Lee, standing a few steps away, avoided her gaze. Linda clutched her clipboard like a shield. Jason stared at the floor, his arrogance long gone. The employees looked less like bankers now and more like witnesses at their own trial. Grace opened her portfolio again. She drew out several sheets of paper, legal documents, audit summaries, and compliance data. These, she said, are records from your internal discrimination reports. 47 complaints in the last 6 months. 76% dismissed without review. The majority came from Black or Latino customers. Robert glanced at the documents, his throat tightening. Grace, Ms. Walker, we're handling those through the proper channels. She tilted her head. Are you, or are you hoping no one notices until it stops trending? The crowd shifted uneasy. Maya's phone caught every flicker of emotion. Grace's calm carried more weight than shouting ever could. She placed another paper on the counter, this one stamped with an official seal. Equal Credit Opportunity Act, she said. Section 701. Discrimination in lending service or treatment based on race, color, or national origin is a federal violation. You're not just breaking trust, Robert. You're breaking the law. A murmur ran through the customers still gathered near the entrance. A woman whispered, "She's teaching them right in their own lobby." Grace continued, her voice quiet but unwavering. You built this institution to represent security, to protect people's money. But what good is security if it's built on exclusion? She looked at Linda. You humiliated a customer because she didn't look like your version of success. Her gaze moved to Jason. You called me a fraud before reading my name. Then to David, and you justified it with protocols. Every one of you played your part. David swallowed hard. Ms. Walker, I'll resign if necessary. Grace cut him off gently. Resignation isn't accountability. Change is. Robert took a deep breath. What do you want, Grace? Her answer came without hesitation. Reform. She laid 5 documents in a neat row on the counter, the headers bold and unmistakable. These are the Walker standards, she said. Immediate actions to rebuild what you've broken. The first document detailed a plan for mandatory empathy and bias training 60 hours annually for every Liberty Trust employee from tellers to executives. You don't fix hearts through handbooks, Grace said. You do it through education, awareness, and time. The second outlined anonymous review stations to be installed in every branch, places where customers could safely report bias or mistreatment without fear of retaliation. Silence, she said, is what allows injustice to thrive. The third proposal described an artificial intelligence system developed with MIT to analyze customer interactions in real time and flag potential bias language or irregular treatment. Technology exposed this, she said, nodding toward Maya's camera. Technology can also help prevent it. The fourth called for a $50 million community investment fund to support minority-owned businesses and financial literacy programs. You take from the community, you give back to it, Grace said simply. The final document outlined transparency measures, quarterly public reports, detailing discrimination cases, actions taken, and reform results. You can't hide from sunlight, she told Robert, and you shouldn't want to. The lobby had gone completely still. Even the security guard, James, looked moved. Robert glanced over the papers, his hands trembling slightly. "These measures are ambitious," he said cautiously. "Implementing them across every branch would cost millions." Grace didn't blink. Prejudice costs more. A long silence followed. Then Robert looked around the room. The tellers, the managers, the crowd of customers holding their phones, the woman at the center of it all. Finally, he nodded. "We'll do it." Grace didn't smile in triumph. She only exhaled slow and deep, as though releasing years of weight. "Then this is the beginning, not the end." Jason stepped forward, his voice cracking. "Ms. Walker, I didn't mean." She turned toward him, her expression softer now. "I know," she said, "but meaning well isn't the same as doing right. Learn the difference." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. Grace turned back to Robert. "I'll be following the implementation personally." "And Robert, make sure it's not just about saving your reputation. Make it about restoring your soul." Maya's camera captured that line perfectly. The comments section exploded with applause emojis and messages of awe. Robert adjusted his tie, his voice shaking slightly. "Grace, I give you my word." "Don't give me words," she replied. "Give me results." She gathered her papers, closed her portfolio, and glanced toward the window. Outside, the city was coated in the faint silver of an early snow. For the first time that day, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. As she turned to leave, the crowd parted silently. Maya lowered her phone for a moment, just to take it in the calm authority, the quiet strength, the grace of a woman who had turned indignity into reform. When the doors closed behind her, the sound of applause filled the lobby. Not polite clapping, but something raw, human, grateful. In that moment, even those who had wronged her understood they hadn't just met a customer. They had met a reckoning. A year later, the city lights of New York shimmered against the glass walls of the Global Financial Equity Summit. The ballroom was filled with leaders in tailored suits, journalists with cameras poised, and investors who once measured success only in numbers. But tonight, the story was not about profits. It was about transformation. At the center of the stage stood Grace Walker. She looked different from that afternoon in Chicago. Her silver hair neatly pinned her posture, strong, her presence commanding yet warm. When she spoke, her voice carried not the sharpness of confrontation, but the steady resonance of conviction. "Dignity," she began, "isn't a luxury in banking. It's the currency of trust. Without it, no transaction has value." The audience leaned in. They knew her story, the viral video that changed an industry, the reforms that followed the reckoning that shook Liberty Trust to its core. What they didn't expect was the calm with which she spoke about forgiveness. "I never wanted revenge," she said. "I wanted recognition. I wanted the system to see the people it had forgotten." Since that day, Liberty Trust had become a different institution. Under Robert Mills's leadership and Grace's oversight, the Walker Standards had not only been implemented, but celebrated. Every branch now hosted empathy training, anonymous feedback systems, and open quarterly diversity reports. The AI bias detection program, once seen as an experiment, had become a model for the entire industry. The numbers told their own story. Customer satisfaction among minority clients rose by nearly 50%. Complaints of discriminatory treatment dropped by more than half. The $50 million community fund had already financed over 400 minority-owned businesses and provided free financial literacy programs to thousands of families. But the greatest change wasn't in statistics, it was in people. Jason, the teller, who once mocked Grace, now spoke at universities about unconscious bias. His humility and candor turned him into an unlikely educator. Linda Prescott had left the bank, but later joined a nonprofit that trained corporate leaders in inclusive management. Even David Lee, after months of silence, reached out to Grace to thank her for giving him a chance to rebuild. "You didn't destroy us," he wrote in a letter that would later be published in The Atlantic. "You taught us what accountability feels like." And Maya Flores, the journalist who had streamed the entire incident, was now the director of communications for Liberty Trust. Her documentary, The Day Grace Walked In, premiered at Sundance, earning standing ovations and sparking a global conversation about bias in financial institutions. James, the security guard, who couldn't meet Grace's eyes that day, now led the company's new division, Director of Customer Integrity. He implemented procedures to prevent situations like the one he'd witnessed. "She didn't just change the bank," he said in an interview. "She changed me." Grace listened to these stories quietly. She didn't seek credit. She sought continuity. Her satisfaction came from the ripple effect, the way one act of standing still had sent motion through an entire system. Across the industry, other banks began adopting Walker compliance programs. The Federal Reserve cited Liberty Trust's reforms as a benchmark for equitable banking practices. Even international financial conferences quoted Grace's lines, framing them as lessons in leadership ethics. When she returned to the podium to close her keynote that night, the applause subsided into expectant silence. Grace smiled faintly, her hands resting on the lectern. "When I walked into that bank," she said, "I didn't know the cameras were rolling. But maybe that's what justice looks like, now transparency that can't be turned off." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "To every person who's ever been dismissed, doubted, or disrespected, your worth isn't determined by who recognizes it. It's determined by who you decide to be when no one does." The room rose in quiet applause, slow, reverent, lasting. It wasn't the kind of applause meant for victory. It was the kind meant for gratitude. Outside, the city pulsed with movement, cars tracing silver lines through the night. Grace walked out of the ballroom alone, the sound of her heels echoing softly down the marble corridor. A young reporter caught up with her at the door and asked Ms. Walker, "What do you think your legacy will be?" Grace stopped, turning slightly toward the woman. Her eyes reflected the light of the city beyond. "Legacy," she said, with a small, knowing smile. "That's not mine to decide. But if somewhere someone walks into a bank and is treated with the respect they deserve, then that's enough." And with that, she stepped into the cool Manhattan night, leaving behind not a scandal, but a standard one that would outlive every name on every building. Grace Walker's story began as a quiet confrontation and ended as a revolution. What started with a single act of prejudice inside a marble lobby became a movement that reshaped an entire industry. She never shouted, never demanded attention, and never sought revenge. She simply stood her ground with grace, strength, and unshakable dignity. In doing so, She exposed not only the biases of a few employees, but the deep fractures within a system built to serve everyone yet designed to trust only a few. Her courage revealed something powerful, that justice does not always come with noise. Sometimes it comes in silence, through composure, through truth, through refusing to walk away, when walking away would be easier. Grace didn't destroy Liberty Trust Bank. She redefined it. She showed that accountability and compassion can coexist, that reform born from humility can rebuild trust stronger than profit ever could. A year later, her influence reached far beyond the financial world. Other industries, healthcare, retail, even education, began to adopt the Walker standards, recognizing that fairness isn't a policy, it's a principle. And for millions of ordinary people watching her story unfold online, she became more than a symbol of resilience. She became proof that one person's quiet courage can change how an entire nation does business. The lesson from Grace Walker's journey is simple, yet profound. Dignity has no price tag, but its absence costs everything. In a world still divided by appearances and assumptions, her story reminds us that equality isn't achieved through anger, but through accountability. It invites each of us to pause and ask, how do I see others? And what do I choose to defend when no one else will? If Grace's story moved you, if it made you reflect, feel, or believe again in the quiet power of integrity, then stay with us. Subscribe to this channel, share this story, and be part of a community that celebrates justice, compassion, and truth. Your support helps us tell more stories that remind the world when dignity stands tall, change begins.